All right. Suppose we should get started then. So we're just going to pick up right where we left off. Having had some nice oatmeal cookies and coffee, we've now got the energy back. And we're going to just jump right into humanity, which is, as I said in the earlier part of this presentation, it's the center. It's where we want to get people to. And justifications is what addresses the circumstance and then brings us back to humanity. So as you can see in the diagram, all the arrows are pointing back to humanity. Common ground, analogy, we're walking with them, and then the pivot question brings us back to what is the difference between a born child and a preborn child? What's the difference? So, the response will be, often, oh, but it's different. You see, the 2-year-old child is a human being. Like they're a real human being, right? A preborn child is a clump of cells, right? It's a clump of cells. Different, totally different, right? It's wrong to kill a human being. A clump of cells, you're not killing anything. That'll often be the response. And that's right actually where we want them, right? We're trying to drive things into the humanity portion. Now, what is the humanity portion? It consists of 4 questions. And you all have a book with you, so I'd encourage you to go to that portion. And it would be actually really beneficial. You don't have to do this sort of on the spot right now, but bring the book home with you and memorize these 4 questions. Because if you commit them to memory and the conversation goes here, these are a very powerful tool to guide them to the pro-life view. And actually, these questions are quite effective in changing hearts and minds. So here are the questions. First one, do you believe all human beings should get human rights? Do all human beings get human rights, or just some human beings? Right? Another way of saying this without using the language of human rights is, shouldn't all human beings deserve not to be killed unjustly? Or aren't all human beings worthy of value? Something like that. You can, depending on the context and the moment, whatever the conversation would require, you can change the language a bit. Sometimes I find that when I'm talking with people who aren't from Canada, international students or whatever, they're kind of like human rights. Like what are human rights? Maybe the country they're coming from doesn't use that language. But you can just say, is it wrong to kill a human being unjustly? Or something like that. But in Canada, most folks know what we're talking about. Do you believe all human beings should get human rights? Most often, they'll say, yeah, absolutely. Well, who doesn't, right? Number 2, if something is growing, isn't it alive? So this kind of takes a little bit of a leap, and so for a moment it might feel like, oh, this is a bit of a, where are we going now? But you can reassure them, oh, trust me, I'm going to get to the point here in just a sec. But if something is growing, sometimes you say biologically. Right? I'm not talking like a snowball, you roll a snowball into a snowman, that sort of growing. I'm talking about 1 cell to 2 cells to 4 cells, cellular reproduction, right? Acorn into big oak tree, right? Little human being into big human being, right? Calf into cow. There's cellular reproduction, biological growth that's taking place. If something is growing that way, is it fair to say that it's alive, a living thing? Dead things don't grow, right? Dead things decompose. Yeah, all right, that's fair. I see where you're coming from. If something's growing, it is alive. Well, if that living organism that we've just talked about has human parents, isn't he or she a human being? Right? So now we've got a living organism, it's growing, it's alive, and its parents are members of the human species. We're talking about biological humanity here. Members of the species Homo sapiens. Right? If that living organism is the product of two human parents, wouldn't that make that thing human? Right? What else could it be, right? Two monkeys reproduce, they're not going to reproduce a giraffe, right? They reproduce according to their kind, according to their species. And human beings are exactly the same, right? We reproduce human beings because we're human beings. Species reproduce their species. And that's all we're getting at here. So we talk about that a little bit. Yeah, okay, sure. It's biologically human. And then this is the conclusion. Wouldn't that make abortion a human rights violation? Right? Because what is abortion? Abortion is the direct, intentional termination of that preborn human life. It's killing a member of the species Homo sapiens. And if all members of the species Homo sapiens deserve human rights protection, which is what we've agreed to in number 1, that pretty much guarantees, doesn't it, that abortion is a human rights violation. It's violating a member of the human species' human right, not to be killed unjustly. So these 4 questions are powerful, and oftentimes I'll walk through it with them in a conversational way, right? Notice that all of these 4 premises are questions, right? The question mark at the end, because our apologetic is very conversational, and we're trying to draw people out. We're putting other people in the driver's seat, so to speak, so that they can discover the truth for themselves. So, okay, they're agreeing to this, agreeing to 1, agreeing to 2, agreeing to 3, and then 4 comes along, and they're going, oh man, what did I just agree to, right? I guess abortion is a human rights violation. And so there's often a pregnant pause, right, where they're kind of thinking over the premises, right, thinking over what they've agreed to, thinking over what's been discussed. And one of 2 things often happens. Either they'll jump to another justification. Well, what about in the case of sexual assault, right? And then we're back to the earlier part of the roadmap. And what do? The same thing we've been doing, right? Follow the roadmap. Common ground analogy question. And then we're back at humanity. And then we have a chance to run through this again with them, right? So we're always guiding the discussion with the roadmap. That's the first thing that can happen. Second thing is, actually there are 3 things. This is the second thing. Second thing is, you're absolutely right. I'm pro-life now. At which case you can shake their hand and welcome to the team, right? So that happens actually more often than you think. There's a very powerful set of questions. Now the third thing is the personhood portion of the roadmap. You remember when I laid out the roadmap, the schema of it, and there was a little funny arrow that said personhood from humanity? That's where we're going to next. But humanity is where we want to camp out. And we can use the science this time. So when we walk through the 4 questions, and whether they agree or disagree with them, we can invite them, look, you don't have to trust my word for it, all right? I would encourage you to look up on your phone, when does human life begin? Google it. And what you're going to find in all of the academic sources, and that needs to be emphasized. We're talking academic sources. You're not like a pro-choice blog or something like that, right? But academic, biological textbooks, online textbooks, and sources will confirm that human life begins at fertilization with the embryo's conception. And so we've walked them through the rationale, right? Reason confirms that preborn children are human beings. We can use science to confirm, to shore up our argument. Science also actually confirms that preborn children are members of the human species. This is agreed upon by the academic community. And of course, if they're in a place, we can use scripture to reason with them and show how God actually values preborn human life as well. But science and reason are on our side with the humanity of the preborn child. And that's important to for pro-lifers to get. Because sometimes we kind of tiptoe around the issues hoping that we don't get refuted or that some, biologist or biology student doesn't have more facts than we have. Well, we don't have to have all of the facts. We just need to know that the facts are on our side in this issue. And so you can invite them, look it up. I can look it up for you if you want, but don't take my word for it. What does the biology say about preborn human life? That it is human life, and it begins at fertilization. So to the response, they're not human, we're going to walk them through the humanity argument and show that actually they are human. They're human beings, biologically speaking. And that leads, of course, to the pro-life view. But what if they respond, they're human, but they're not like you or I? They're human, but they're not persons. They're human, but they can't think for themselves yet. They're not conscious yet. These sorts of things. Have you guys ever heard these sorts of objections before? Right? Preborn children are different than born children. Well, duh, everyone agrees on that, right? Of course, preborn children aren't self-aware yet. That'd be a little funny, a little strange. I'm glad God made us not have self-awareness until later, right? That person is where we're going to, and that's the kind of category that we're entering into. When they try and say, okay, preborn human life is human life, born life is human life, but there's a difference. And therefore, there's a difference of value. When they go there, they might bring up things like awareness, as I've said. They might bring up dependency on the mother, right? Of course, dependency is at an all-time high when they're in the mother's womb, right? The degree of dependency. But dependency starts to decrease, first as they're born, and then as they get older, and hopefully as they move out of the house one day and have children of their own, right? That'd be an ideal human progression, is for their dependency on their mother to decrease, right? So of course there's a difference there. What about the ability to feel pain? Preborn children don't have the neurological hardware to feel pain yet. They haven't developed that yet. Born children can feel pain, right? If you pinch them, they'll cry. They can feel that. It hurts. Of course there's a difference there. I've already mentioned location, right? One is inside the mother, one is outside the mother. What about size? Okay, one is bigger than the other, of course. And you continue to get bigger and bigger until you're, reached full adult height, and then maybe you get bigger sideways, right? That happens sometimes. We fluctuate size as we get older. But this is the key, right? This is how we respond. It's tempting to refute and to say, well, why does that matter, right? Why does that matter? We might jump in here, but we have to ask the question, why the difference exists. This is going to be a strategy that's really useful because it's going to address all of these at once. Rather than fact-checking them, sometimes people will, go into the details about, well, when does a preborn child have a heartbeat, right? When does a preborn child have a heartbeat? And maybe they'll have the facts and you won't really know, and, those are the weeds that you don't need to get into. Not helpful for the conversation. You might only have 10 minutes with them, and you want to convince them that all humans are valuable. So don't get into the weeds. Use a strategy that addresses all of these differences. Ask why the difference exists. And the reason the difference exists is because of the child's age. When you're, sort of as young as you can get, fertilization time, you don't have any of these. You have a very small size, a very high degree of dependency, and you have no ability to feel pain. And as you get older, as you continue to grow and develop biologically, as time passes, you start to develop these abilities, right? And so you can ask them that. Is it fair to say that age is what ultimately causes these kinds of differences? That as a child gets older, first as a preborn child, and then as it's born, it continues to develop these abilities, and that age is therefore the cause. So you ask them this, and they go, yeah, okay, fair enough. I see where you're going with this. Maybe they don't see, but they're, okay, I'll play with you. I'll play ball. It's age. This is where you go next. Okay, so what I've suggested just a moment ago is that to have human rights, you need to be a human being. All right? All human beings should have human rights. What I hear you saying is that this equation is wrong. You don't just have to be a human being to have human rights. You actually have to be a human being plus have a certain feature to get human rights. And that feature is age. And you can ask them, am I hearing that well? Is that a fair representation of your view? That you have to be a human plus have a certain age in order to get human rights, in order to have the right not to be killed unjustly. And they'll go, okay, fair enough. This is where we go next. All right, so your suggestion is that human plus age gives you human rights. Now that reminds me of some other equations that I've heard in human history that have been used in the past. What about humanity plus gender, sexism? You have to be a human plus be a certain gender in order to get human rights protection. What about humanity plus skin color? Just being human doesn't get you human rights. Now you have to be a human plus have a special kind of skin color or be a member of a certain race to get human rights protection. Now we agree, right, that making the equation human plus skin color is bad. Oh yeah, 100%. Racism, terrible. And we agree that sexism is bad too, right? Humanity plus gender, unjust. We agree. And so isn't human plus age doing essentially the same thing as those two examples? Aren't we really drawing a circle around a certain part of humanity and saying, this part of humanity is valuable and deserves not to be killed unjustly, and these parts of humanity are not valuable, and we can therefore kill them? How is your kind of discrimination different from these other discriminations that have been used in the past? And the response to this question is oftentimes more silence for a little while, right? More consideration. Sometimes it'll be, oh, well, of course I disagree with like racism and sexism, but how could you compare these two? And you have to keep asking the question, show me how they're different. Isn't this just drawing the circle around one portion of humanity that you don't value, saying it's okay to kill that portion, but not these? Keep setting age-based discrimination alongside these other forms of discrimination. And the point will be well made. And so this strategy of dealing with personhood often leads to a pro-life person. They're so uncomfortable with being discriminatory. And they see that a pro-choice position that relies on personhood is ultimately one of the worst kinds of discrimination. It results in babies' lives lost every day. They'll realize that, and they'll come to the pro-life view, and we've seen it happen. Now that's the apologetic, right? We use common ground, we build an analogy, we use the pivot question. That guides us to the humanity portion, where we show that preborn children are human beings. We walk them through those 4 questions. And then we either lead them to the pro-life view, or we discuss personhood and show that all human beings are valuable. Now, I want to show you guys a video. And this video is a little sensitive, perhaps for younger eyes, so just a fair warning. But it introduces us to the victims of abortion. And the reason why I want to share it is I know of no better way to communicate the gravity of the situation. It's fine to talk about abortion statistics and what goes on, but until we actually see it, it's just too easy to forget about what the situation really is in Canada. And so I'd invite you to watch. If you have to look away, that's fine. And after there'll be an opportunity to be able to do something about this injustice together, and then Kyle and I would be happy to answer your questions. Proverbs 24:11 instructs us to hold back and to rescue those who are being led to the slaughter. That's God's desire for the Christian church, that we would rescue, that we would raise a voice for the voiceless. 300 babies today have been destroyed through abortion in Canada, and every day. And so the call is this, and the encouragement and the exhortation is this. Would that we, as Christians, stand up as ambassadors for the unborn, for those who have no voice? Would we combat the leading cause of death in Canada for human beings? I want to invite you, my colleagues and I want to invite you, and Hillside, and anyone else you know, to be a part of the cure. The diagnosis is grim, but we see that these tools work. These tools are effective. And all that is needed are faithful workers, brave workers to use them. So the invitation would be this. We're actually going to be here next weekend on Saturday. We're going to be in Morden, my colleagues and I. And we're looking for 8 people about who would be willing to apply what has been learned today. Now, the people who have learned, if you guys would want to join us, the first step would just be to listen, to see how we have these conversations. We're not going to throw you into the deep end. But we would be very encouraged to see Hillside, to see others who you are in community with, friends, family, who share your views about this, to join us for an hour or two on Saturday morning. And so Kyle, I think, is going to distribute, or has already, cards. You can fill out your contact information. And we'll let you know the location. We're going to go for ice cream after. And it'll be a good time to use this, to commune with one another, to fight against this injustice together. And so I just would really thank you for being here. You guys have been a great audience, and great to connect, be with one another on a Sunday. And so I'll invite Kyle up. He just left the room, so maybe he's trying to get out of the Q&A. Leave it to me. I'll humbly accept that. And so, I'd be encouraged to just know what questions you have. Feel free to ask whatever you'd like. If it's not related to this, I can't guarantee that I'll know the answer. But I'll do my best. And so, what questions do you have? Comments, concerns, stories you'd like to share? Anything like that?
Do you know how they got the footage for these examples? Real life examples? How did they get the footage for that?
Yeah. Awesome. That's a good question, and that's one that we get quite often. So all of these images were taken from real children who had been killed in various clinics across mostly the United States. And that's where they're being procured from. Yes. And quite often it's because, the abortionist, they like money. Or they're willing to let a pro-life photographer, pro-lifers come in, take these images. And so that's how some of them are procured. Otherwise, it's rescuing these children from perhaps waste bins and things like that outside of the clinics. Rescuing their corpses, that is. Yeah. And then documenting this so that we can then use it to educate the culture about what's happening. Yeah. Awesome. Good question. Yeah, any questions about the apologetics or abortion in Canada, or especially if you were here at my prior presentation, if a question that didn't get asked then, even asking that question as well? Mm-hmm.
Just have a comment to make about dependence. You were talking about the age and preborn level of dependence, and I guess the frame could, I don't know if it's useful, I have to process this, but the frame could be expanded to recognize that all adults are dependent on sources outside of themselves for completion, and God intentionally designed us that way. We need air, food, water, clothing, we also need belonging. And so our personal needs are also satisfied through levels of connection.
Hmm.
And so it's only prideful that we disacknowledge that we are dependent on sources outside of ourselves for completion.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
anyway, so it just made me think. It's true what you're saying. It's not that it's not true. It's just that when we expand the picture, we realize that's true of adults as well.
Mhm.
And we fail to acknowledge it with ourselves as adults sometimes, and we fail to acknowledge it with children
Yeah.
adequately, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. That's, it raises an important point that there's sort of this modern myth of this sort of isolated, individual, independent self that gets perpetuated in the culture, right? That the goal for, self-actualization is just total independence. And therefore, every kind of dependency is looked down upon in a way, or is in some way considered a failure, right? If I depend upon people in some way, then I'm not, being who I ought to be, right? Just totally independent and secure in myself. I think, as Christians, we should strive for some kind of independency to a degree so that we can then be strong enough for others to depend on us, right? But we also recognize that we all do depend on one another, right? As social beings, as beings with families, and we depend on God every day for our daily bread, our physical daily bread and our spiritual daily bread. And so, I think it's important to explode that myth of, the independent man. It is something that we see too in our apologetics, that people will, especially in the personhood, right? I think you're talking about the personhood section where what distinguishes a preborn child from a born child is the degree of dependency, right? At some point, apparently dependency ends for a pro-choicer very often. Well, see, a preborn child is so dependent that it's attached to its mother. A born child has viability. It can survive on its own. Well, of course, we all know that that's not true. A child that is just born cannot survive on its own, right? Not a 1-year-old can survive on its own. Not a 2-year-old can survive on its own. So dependency actually extends far longer. And in fact, no one can really thrive on his or her own, right? If any one of us were, stuck in some sort of, isolation, extreme isolation, we would cease to be ourselves. We would cease to flourish. We might be able to biologically survive for a time if we had food, but we would not be thriving because we're social beings, right? I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, everything that Jerome said. We're conceived in relationship, right? Every child has a mother, and every mother has a child, and we're social beings fundamentally. And so I do think, that modern view that every man is an island unto himself is very problematic, and it comes up in these discussions. And the reason why we boil it down to age is that's one framework for all of those personhood objections. And so instead of responding to each one individually in a very specific way, respond to it by framing it as age-based discrimination and head off a bunch of those other objections. And but if you do need to, go beyond the age framework, kind of getting into some of the things that we've just talked about and that you brought up, I think that can make sense too, because there's a lot of truth there, and the truth rings. So I think that's a good thing.
Do you encounter a lot of genetic questions?
Questions about genetics, like the maybe in like sort of the humanity portion, right? Like genetic arguments for.
If the person knows that they're going to have handicap.
I see. Yeah. So if there's So just for those who didn't hear the question, say a mom finds out that, or parents find out that their preborn child may have a kind of illness or condition that is genetically passed on, right? Maybe they do testing or some other such thing to figure that out. I can't say that we encounter that very specifically, but I can say how I would be inclined to respond, right? And how I'd be inclined to respond is to really first develop common ground, right? Because conditions, whether they're in born children, adult children, or preborn children, it's a tragedy, right? It creates hardship. It's a difficulty, right? It's a way that humanity originally was not created to be, right? We're in the fallen world, and therefore we have these kinds of conditions that come about. And so I'd want to develop common ground with that, right? But then also use an analogy, right? For people who have children with genetic illnesses that have been passed on, right? Grave difficulty. But no one here, right? Not the pro-choicer, not I, not any of us here would say it would be okay, right? To kill a born child that has an illness. And so if not a born child, then why a preborn child, right? And so I think that if it's framed as an objection, right, or as a justification for a pro-choice position, I think we can probably deal with it like we can deal with all the other justifications. But I wouldn't want to go into like the details because I just don't know a lot of the details, right? I might even, if there's a sort of a personal history, a history there, or a personal wrestling with these things, I might ask questions and draw out more, right? Just to figure out, like, who is it that I'm talking to? Like, maybe they have this illness. Maybe they actually do have a child right now that has that illness, and they want to know what I think. And I don't want to just quickly, go through the motions with them without getting to know them. And so if I suspect that there's a personal involvement, I'll start asking more questions and just get to know the person I'm talking with. So that would be an extra consideration. But yeah, I don't know. Kyle, do you have anything to add there? Does that kind of answer your question? Or is there maybe more there that I didn't? Okay. Yeah, that's a good question.
I actually have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Is there any law in Canada for limits on at what term is it full term?
Yeah. So it's full term. So 0 to 9 months, you can have an abortion. There are just no laws on the books.
Right.
And so that's why it's just kind of, the Wild West as far as abortion is concerned. Now, certain clinics will have their own internal bylaws as to the stages of pregnancy that they'll carry out an abortion for. And so there are a few, not very many, but a few sort of third trimester abortion clinics, late-term abortion clinics in Canada. Now, if a mother wants to have a late-term abortion, she would go to just a clinic, let's say here in Winnipeg, and then make the request and would be flied out on the taxpayer dime to that specialized clinic. But yeah, today for any reason, for no reason, and from 0 to 9 months, you can have an abortion. So that really puts us in the same camp as China and North Korea. And those are the 3 worst countries, the most dangerous countries for preborn children: Canada, North Korea, and China.
And then my next question was, are you facing anybody wanting to make your voice not heard? Because in the States, you're hearing somebody stand in front of a Planned Parenthood, they get arrested.
Right.
So
Yeah.
just wondering, do you have any of that opposition coming your way?
Yeah. Yeah, we do. We have, since our founding, 2011, we have had pretty continual opposition politically and in the academic community. So Justin Trudeau, who is, out of office now, was a pretty vocal opponent of ours on the campaign trail. He would frequently mention CCBR, and he would, slander us and do everything he could basically to make it difficult to say the kinds of things that we we want to and need to say. In Canada, there are also bubble zones around abortion clinics, so people can't sidewalk counsel, outside of an abortion clinic like you might be able to in, say, Texas or Florida or. No, we can't. Yeah, we can't go close to the clinics. We'll often, when we do outreach, we'll go almost as close as we can go downtown, but we can't go close enough to engage women and men who are going in and who are considering abortion. Otherwise, we would be. So we try and change hearts and minds in the public square, but yeah. So circumstances are a little more difficult for pro-life organizations in Canada, I would say. I don't know, Kyle, if you have anything more to.
Yeah, in our work in the educational sphere, we're really focused on, especially in Canada where sidewalk counseling is very difficult, really focused on reaching people weeks, months, years before they even find themselves in a crisis pregnancy. So that when they do get in a crisis pregnancy, they would already know that abortion's not an option for them. And so that's why we go to the university campuses, do a lot of work there, where we can in front of high schools, downtown, street corners when people are walking by, engaging with pedestrians or going door to door, really working to make abortion unthinkable through conversation and anchoring that conversation in the reality that there is a real victim of abortion. Yeah. So, sidewalk counseling, very difficult in Canada, but educating about abortion, that's something that we're generally able to do pretty unrestricted in Canada. There actually is one organization, the Abortion Rights Coalition of Canada, Joyce Arthur. She's someone who is very pro-choice. It's a premier pro-abortion organization in Canada, and they're lobbying at every turn to try and restrict free speech around our projects. But here in Manitoba, it's been very good. We've been able to work very unhindered in Winnipeg and in other municipalities. So that is a blessing. Yeah.
Can you just repeat her name? Joyce Arthur, you said?
Yeah.
And what's the organization she's with?
Abortion Rights Coalition of Canada.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Other questions or comments or?
You had mentioned ectopic pregnancy earlier.
Yeah.
Can you go over like framework kind of for what the argument would be like? Because I know that is often used as like it's an abortion.
Yeah.
So, like it's life of the mother and that kind of
Yep.
gets a little bit more convoluted. So would you mind just touching on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if someone explicitly mentions an ectopic pregnancy and says, well, if you keep doing your work, if women are, having an ectopic pregnancy, they'd be forced to die, right, as a result of it. That's the claim. And so what I usually do is first establish common ground and then just define what I mean by abortion and then talk about ectopic pregnancy and show how it's not. The treatments that I would suggest are not abortion procedures, right? And actually, you look at legislation in the States, like very robust pro-life legislation, there's always a life of the mother exception for these kinds of operations. And so when people often say, well, women are forced to suffer these ectopic pregnancies because laws are so restrictive. And that's usually kind of a fact-checking thing. It's kind of a myth. I'm not going to say that a mother has never suffered from an ectopic pregnancy, but the laws themselves don't restrict this kind of procedure. And so what I would do is I'd develop common ground, right? And then you want to make clear that what I mean by abortion, right, is directly and intentionally killing a preborn child. So it's direct, the procedure is direct, and it's intentional. That's the purpose of the procedure. Now, in an ectopic pregnancy, you have a preborn child, an embryo, that gets lodged in an area other than the area where it should be lodged in order to grow, right? So this is often in the fallopian tube, right? And so there, you don't have the kind of ability to expand that you do in the uterus, which means that at an early stage, the fallopian tube will burst and cause massive internal bleeding, leading to the death of the preborn child and the mother, right? So we have to do something. And so a pro-life suggestion would be something called a salpingectomy. It's a procedure that's done, and what it is, and Kyle can correct me on the details if I'm wrong here, but basically the surgeon will cut out very carefully the portion of the fallopian tube that the preborn child has lodged in and remove it. And by removing it, the child can, of course, no longer grow and expand in that area, thus killing the mom. But it's removed surgically, and at the present moment, we have no technology available to preserve such an early life, and so tragically, it will lead to the death of that preborn child. But the purpose of the procedure was not to kill that child, right? We're conducting a life-saving operation here, right? We're trying to save what we can and not directly killing anyone to save, basically. And so that's the majority position in the pro-life community, and that's what would be used in the case of an ectopic pregnancy. And we need to just hope and pray that science continues to progress to the point where even such early life can be saved. Yeah. Does that address your question? Yeah. Kyle, did you have anything?
Yeah, no, that's...
Okay. Yeah. It's a good question, yeah.
Or maybe one thing to note. Just a couple other things to note about ectopic pregnancy is that most of the time when the ectopic pregnancy is discovered, the baby has already passed. But that baby with the placenta, it will still expand even after the child has died, and so it does have to get taken care of. But the procedure that Jerome mentioned, the child is going to die anyways, and so most of the time the child has already died, and sometimes they're still alive. So when you do that procedure, at most you're hastening their death, but you're not directly or intentionally killing the child, and that makes a big difference. You're treating that child's body with a certain amount. You're not attacking the integrity of that child's body, right? Whereas the only other options really to deal with the situation involve methotrexate, which is a chemical that attacks rapidly dividing cells, and that would be the placenta, that would be the child. And then also salpingostomy, which essentially is doing a slit in the fallopian tube and then vacuuming out or suctioning out that child, which would be very similar to an aspiration abortion. And so those are really the options, and those involve direct intentional killing. Whereas the goal of the salpingectomy is to remove an about to rupture organ. It's not to kill the child. We'd all be happier if that child survived, or if we could reimplant them or gestate them in an artificial womb or something, a solution that doesn't currently exist, right? So you can see there's a difference in intention there, and intentions matter in ethics. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, good. Other questions? All right, well, I think it's maybe getting past our bedtimes, I don't know. But I hope it was worth it. It was certainly worth it for me, and I'm just, again, we're so grateful that you guys came out. We're very blessed to be with you and to share this with you, and we pray that it would be useful and fruitful for you as you go out and have these conversations. And just know that you as a Christian can make a difference in child's lives. I know you know that already, but in a very concrete way, you can save future lives by talking about these things in this way. So the Lord bless you and keep you, and have a good night, and we'll stay back for a little bit. And I think your pastor has another word.
No, thank you all for coming. I hope it was very informative and very beneficial. It's good to see so many people out who have a passion for saving all these lives. It's truly a tragedy what's going on in this country, And so it's so good to see so many people out here, and we hope that with God's providence and His help, many children will be saved. But join me. Let's pray for these men as they go back there. Dear Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for this evening. We give thanks for Kyle and for Jerome and for taking the time and for the work that they are doing. And we know, Lord, that you are the one who gives fruit. And we just pray that you give them wisdom, that you give them strength, that you open doors to be able to proclaim your goodness. And we ask that through dealing with this topic in so many different ways, shapes, and forms, Lord, that they will get a chance to present the gospel to these people, Lord, and that they will be saved. And we just pray, Lord, that you will change that you first all have mercy on Canada. We ask for mercy, Lord, for all the killing that has been done, for so many babies who have been killed. We ask for mercy, Lord, and your grace upon this country. We ask for the leaders, Lord, that you would bring about a change, that you would raise up leaders who are willing to take this on, who will take a stand for what is right, and that they will make a positive difference in this area. And we just pray, Lord, that much fruit will come out of the ministry of CCBR and all the programs they have coming up, Lord. Just ask your protection, your wisdom, and your guidance. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much for coming. Have a great night.